whole population. But soil is not just important for growing of our food and to secure our food security. Soils are also incredibly important in the carbon cycle. Actually, 3/4 of all the terrestrial carbon pools are found in soils, so it's the biggest terrestrial pool of carbon. So how we manage the soil has a huge impact on our climate as well. And clearly, coming from UN Environment, where I work, it's also important to note the crucial importance of soils for biodiversity. Now, many of us think about soil having a couple of creepy crawlies that may or may not be very beneficial to us, or some that we don't really like because they are creepy crawlies. But there are more than 360,000 different animals living in the soil. 360,000. That's a lot. We don't know most of them by name, certainly not those of us here in the room. I think we can perhaps name 10, maybe 20 if we're lucky. But there are an enormous amount of biodiversity in the soil. And obviously all of that helps to have a substrate that is essential for growing our food. Unfortunately, we are not taking well care of our soil. About 1/3 of all the soils in the world are degraded. That's 1/3. Now, we had an estimate here in sub-Saharan Africa that soil degradation costs the governments of sub-Saharan Africa $68 billion per year in lost income, simply because we can't grow as much food as we should. We have to take measures to rehabilitate the soil. So there's a huge impact on how we're dealing with the soil. But the good news is we can do something about it. We know also that we lose about 1/3 of the food that we produce is lost. Now, much of that could actually be turned into compost to help us generate new soils. There are also ways in which that we can protect our soils from wind, from salination, by using planting of trees and other vegetation. There are ways in which we can enhance the organic matter of the soils by less tillage, by looking at organic agriculture, and you will hear much more about that from the panel that we have here today, because we have a great panel with us today. Tell us a bit about the importance of soil, what we can do to help better manage our soils here today. My role here is to make sure that things run smoothly. My name is Mette Wilkie. As you can see, I lead the Ecosystems Division within UN Environment. So that's also the division where we deal with soil and water, biodiversity, and ecosystem management broadly. So we have a packed schedule here today, and we have some great presentations here. So I will start with the first one. Carlos Martin Novella, who's the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention, will talk to us a little bit about that convention and how it relates to soil. Carlos.
Thank you very much, Mette, and good morning to everyone. First of all, to thank UN Environment and FAO for this opportunity, first of all, to organize this event, and secondly, for inviting us to be here. I am, as you said, working for the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions. Those are 3 legally binding frameworks, 3 different conventions that are dealing with, the first one, Basel, is dealing with waste, and in particular hazardous waste. The second, the Rotterdam Convention, deals with prior informed consent of movements, transboundary movements of chemicals. And the third one, Stockholm, is dealing with persistent organic pollutants. And basically what it does is, after a review, scientific review of some proposals, when there are signs of any chemical or pesticide being persistent, organic, then eventually they become listed under the conventions, and in that cases they are phasing out from the market. So this is more or less what we do. So what is our link with the work on soils? Let me see if I know how to manage this. No.
I think it's this one here.
Yeah, that one. No. I went too quick. Yeah. So to start with this last thing, with the persistent organic pollutants, there are some chemicals, there are some fertilizers, or there are some pesticides that are used by farmers where they were produced. Was produced with the best intentions, were helping to increase production, but eventually they are found to be persistent, to be bad for health. Some of them has carcinogenic properties, and they are coming into the scope of our convention. And even when they are banned and they are phased out of the market, they are still there because they are persistent. So there is a problem. There is a problem that is very difficult to face. Where these pesticides are retained in the soil for long time. Then we have the other problem that is somehow different to address. That is when we have the stockpiles of these chemicals and pesticides, that once they are phased out of the market, of course, we have to look for the measures for taking rid of them. There are some procedures, but also there are some places where they stay for a long time, and there are problems with the leaking of the products into the ground. There is a direct link between all these with the safety of the food, wheat, and the levels of the soil pollutants. Bioaccumulation in organisms and biomagnification along the food chain are causes of concern, in particular for persistent organic pollutants. For example, it has been documented that ingestion of soil contaminated with persistent organic pollutants for poultry and cattle can result in the bioaccumulation of these chemicals in food, such as eggs and milk. Therefore, the commitment of the member states that are parties to the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions to protect human health and environment from the harm posed by hazardous chemicals and wastes can therefore contribute significantly to managing the soil pollution. The Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions provide a framework for the life cycle management of these chemicals. The three conventions cover elements to cradle-to-grave approach. They have a common objective, that is to protect health and environment, and most of the persistent organic pollutants are covered by three conventions. As waste, all chemicals fall under the scope of the Basel Convention, and moreover, the Basel, Stockholm, Rotterdam Conventions are instruments to adapt to changes the times, as the recent meetings of the Conference of the Parties held in Geneva at the beginning of the year has demonstrated. The Basel Convention calls for the environmental sound management of hazardous waste, which is essentially to prevent and reduce the contamination of soils from a broad range of activities across the economic sectors. Ongoing activities under the Basel Convention that will assist parties in implementing measures to prevent the soil pollution include partnerships in different mainstreams of waste, like household waste, or in some other cases, e-waste. We are producing some guidance to member states how to manage with these different kinds of waste. The Rotterdam Convention, as I said, contributes to environmental sound use of a number of hazardous pesticides and industrial chemicals by facilitating information among member states about the properties, the characteristics of these chemicals, and the possibility to establish some trade measures when they are moving across borders. And the Stockholm Convention provides for global measures to reduce or eliminate releases of persistent organic pollutants. Soil contamination from this release of this class of chemicals is of high concern because of their toxicity, their propensity to accumulation, and to remain intact in the environment for decades. So member states have the obligation to prevent pollution from these chemicals. And we know that it is technically quite difficult in some cases how to take rid of them. We have made some evaluations of effectiveness of the convention. when it comes to the presence of these chemicals in human samples and blood, in tissues. We have seen that since the entry into force of the convention, the percentages has decreased substantially, so it's a good sign that the convention is having teeth and is having good effects. But of course, there is much more to know about the persistence of these chemicals on the ground and on soil, and this is a legacy that we will need to face for a long, long time. What we are doing, of course, is contained within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda. There is one specific goal about sustainable use that we are clearly focused on, but at the same time, our activities are affecting and relevant for all the other goals of the 2030 Agenda. And for all these reasons, we were extremely happy to learn early this year the plans of FAO to organize a very important symposium next year on soils pollution. And we are extremely happy to be able to collaborate with FAO in having this symposium next year organized and run smoothly. So I think with this I gave a very brief view of what is the conventions and how our work relates to the protection of soils, and I will be happy to answer any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. We will take questions and answers at the end of this session. I think we want to just hear from a few more, but this was just to set the stage to say that there is an international legal framework on how we deal with some of the chemicals that may have an adverse effect on the soils, and as part of that, also on our health. But clearly, we also need to make sure that we can continue to produce our agricultural crops and look at how we can protect the plants and what impact that protection might have. So I'm very pleased to hand now over to Professor Dan Pennock, who is from the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils, who will tell us a bit about the current knowledge on the impact of plant protection products both on soil functions and soil ecosystems. Dan, you have the floor.
With you. Thank you. My name is Dan Pennock. I'm the Canadian representative on the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils, and I'm here to release our report that we have completed on this question called the Global Assessment of the Impact of Plant Protection Products on Soil Functions and Soil Ecosystems. Are those slides? Sorry. And the report's being released simultaneously, or I guess with a couple hours remove, in Rome at FAO headquarters and at the United Nations in New York today. But I think we're the first one by the time zone, so it's being released here first. Yes. So the ITPS, I'm sorry, that seems as if it's starting here. The ITPS was asked to do this by our parent organization, the, sorry. It seems skipping ahead for some reason, by the Global Soil Partnership. And they were asked to do this in 2016 to provide a high-level scientific opinion of the effects of plant protection products on soil functions and soil ecosystems. And the ITPS, if you're not familiar with it, is a panel of 27 members from 7 regions, and we provide scientific support for the work of the Global Soil Partnership. The rationale for the report, I think, is fairly clear. There's an increasing use of plant protection products globally, and this has led to accelerating concerns about the effect of these products on the environment and especially on human health. And it's essential, of course, as we've heard from our colleagues from the conventions, that the regulatory systems are based on current and reliable scientific evidence. And that's what our parent group, the Global Soil Partnership, asks us to produce. So the report has 2 main components. There's a scientific opinion, which I'll be discussing today, and then there's a much longer section on the scientific evidence that that opinion is based on. And the scientific evidence is drawn from the recent literature in this area, especially those studies which have looked across a large range of studies on the effect of plant protection products on soil organisms. So it's a review of the current literature and trying to draw from that the major conclusions which are summarized in the opinion itself. So to begin with a few definitions, plant protection products are a subset of the overall range of pesticides, specifically those pesticides that are used to control pests that impact plant production. And we focus on plant protection products that have contact with the soil, which is within our mandate as a body. Our assessment focuses on the diffuse application of plant protection products in plant production systems. It does not concentrate on the concentrated spills and leakage associated with point sources of pollution. Secondly, we use the definition of sustainable soil management, which is contained in the 2015 Revised World Soil Charter. That definition guides the work of the ITPS generally and has two major parts. First of all, soil management is sustainable if the supporting, provisioning, regulating, and cultural services provided by the soil are maintained or enhanced. So the maintenance of ecosystem services provided by the soil. But secondly, the maintenance or enhancement of those services cannot come at the cost of impairing the soil or soil functions themselves. So a two-part definition which we applied throughout the assessment to look at the effects of plant protection products. So turning then to the first section of the report, the effect of plant protection products on soil diversity and soil functions, although time is relatively short, there's a few key points about soil organisms I want to make. And in a sense, celebrating their role in ecosystem services. First of all, the host of ecosystem services and functions provided by the soil are underlain by a complex suite of soil biota and organisms. They're central to most of the services. So for example, the provisioning service of food is of course underlain by nutrient cycling within the soil, and soil organisms are central to that. Complex soil functions such as the provision of nutrients, so the example shown here is of the nitrogen cycle, and at each stage in the nitrogen cycle, soil organisms are involved with the complex transformations that are required to make nitrogen available for plant growth. Second, there is an extraordinary range of life available in the soil. They're not perhaps the most attractive group of organisms overall, creepy crawlies I think they were referred to early on, but they're fascinating in their own right. So a truly diverse range. In our report, we focus on two groups, the earthworms and soil microorganisms, specifically soil fungi and bacteria. These are the organisms responsible for many of the ecosystem services provided, and they're by far the most studied in terms of the impact of plant protection products on soil functions. So this is really the focus of the report, although other organisms are discussed. A third and very important point is that our knowledge of the range of life in the soil is very limited. So this is a graph showing the percentage of different groups that have been described. And it's estimated that less than 5% of soil fungi and less than 2% of soil bacteria have been identified, compared to almost 90% of vascular plants. So our report is necessarily incomplete because, in fact, we know relatively little about life in the soil. It also means that terms like rare or extirpated or extinct are inappropriate when we talk about soil biodiversity, because you can't use those terms if the organisms haven't been identified, let alone counted. So we need a different approach to assessing soil biodiversity and the effects of plant protection products. So turning then to the scientific opinion and beginning with microorganisms, the studies that we summarize, and there are hundreds overall, have consistently found measurable and statistically significant effects of plant protection products on soil organisms, to begin with them. The effects lead to both significant increases, significant decreases, and often no change in attributes such as biomass or enzyme activity, respiration, or soil's composition. So a tremendous range of results in the literature in terms of the effects of plant protection products. In some cases, the evidence is better established for the harmful effects of plant protection products on earthworms. So specifically, the negative effects of copper-based fungicides are well established, and recent evidence indicates that the neonicotinoids are particularly toxic to earthworms. So there are certainly some specific examples of the negative effect of plant protection products, but overall there is very limited evidence that the observed effects of plant protection products on soil organisms have led to significant and long-lasting decreases in soil functions. And this inability to link the observed effects on organisms with soil functions is a major limitation of the current literature. We conclude that the application of a plant protection product may lead to the local suppression of soil organisms, but we believe that the resilience of the organisms, the functional redundancy present in soil, and their diffusion from non-effective areas is well established, and with the exception of those specific cases, the effects of plant protection products are transitory. In our opinion, we also examine two ecosystem services of particular relevance provided by the soil. The first is the regulation of water quality by the soil. In terms of the regulation of water quality, the role of the soil is to retain pesticides at the point of application and allow soil functions to decompose and transform those pesticides such that neither they or their decomposition products pose a threat to the broader environment. If the soil fails to do that, then the pesticides or their transformation products are transmitted into the larger environment, specifically in this case into the aquatic environment. In terms of water quality, it is well established that although rare, pesticide levels in surface and groundwater that exceed standards for drinking water and aquatic life occur and have been observed in the scientific literature. Soil management practices that cause plant protection levels in water to exceed regulatory guidelines for drinking water or aquatic life are unsustainable according to the definition of sustainable soil management in the revised World Soil Charter. It's important to note, however, that soil properties and management are only partial contributors to this issue, as the type and application methods for the pesticides and the method of application also play an important role. But there's certainly no doubt that sustainable soil management is an important part in the development of integrated pest management programs. The second ecosystem service we examined was the role of plant protection products in the regulation of soil erosion. And the role of plant protection products is somewhat indirect in this, but nonetheless of critical importance. The most widely practiced measure to reduce soil erosion is the reduction or elimination of tillage of the soil surface, what is generally called no-till. And no-till has been shown to be very effective in the reduction of erosion and runoff in particular environments, especially in temperate climates, and that effect is well established. The role for plant protection products is that plant protection products, specifically glyphosate, are widely used for weed suppression in no-till systems. And in our examination across the literature, glyphosate is the main herbicide used and for weed suppression, and neither it nor its major metabolite AMPA have been shown to have consistently negative effects on soil microorganisms or earthworms. So in our opinion then, the literature currently available suggests that the benefits associated with enhanced erosion control through no-till in some regions are greater than the soil-related risks of plant protection product use in those regions. And I should note in the Status of the World Soil Resource Report, which the ITPS produced in 2015, soil erosion is deemed as the #1 threat globally to soil functions, and hence its control is a very important part of sustainable soil management. So there are many measures we can use in soil management to enhance biodiversity, certainly improve pesticide application methods, an overall reduction in pesticide use, and the diversification of cropping systems are all central in integrated pest management. But there are soil management measures, such as erosion control, the reduction of tillage, and the incorporation of organic residues into our cropping systems that are important contributors to that. So sustainable soil management has a very important role to play as we move towards better pest management. And many of these approaches are further developed in the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management, which was recently adopted by the Food and Agriculture Organization. And these are being further amplified through the works of the Global Soil Partnership and the FAO itself. So obviously we recognize that there are many critical issues to do with plant protection products and pesticides, such as their effect on non-soil dwelling organisms or on human health, that are as or more important than those that we examine in our report. They're beyond the scope of our assessment and beyond the expertise of the committee itself. So our focus very much focuses then on the soil organisms and their response. So that's a rather heavy topic in a lot of respects, and the organizer said, don't forget this is a celebration. And so indeed I have a t-shirt here to show it's a celebration. And I think one of the things that the panel would like to celebrate is the very high quality of science that's available to us as we did this assessment. There are very good meta-analysis across studies, and more recently some very innovative studies on food webs and on other elements which will really further our knowledge in this area. So this is certainly not the final statement on this by any stretch of the imagination. It's a summary of the literature at this time, but there is very fine science available to us. The road to global adoption of sustainable soil management is a long one, and at each stage along that road, we require this sort of high-quality science information to be available to us. And I'll end, as the previous speaker did, promoting the forthcoming Global Symposium on Soil Pollution. The conventions are a partner with us, as is UNEP, and it's being held May 2nd to 4th in Rome, Italy, and should be an excellent meeting to further discuss the issues which are being discussed at the meeting here. So, many thanks for your attention.
Shall we give a round of applause? A round of applause for our first two speakers. Now, we have heard about the regulations that are in place. We've heard from the science community. Now, can we hear from the farmers? Vijay Talam is Vice Chairman of Farmers Empowerment Corporation in the government of Andhra Pradesh in India. Vijay.
Good morning, and thank UNEP for the invitation to celebrate the World Soils Day. And our approach is from the farmers, practitioners' perspective. And as you can see, we have an approach called zero budget natural farming, which means zero chemicals. Zero pesticides and zero chemical fertilizers. And we have been very inspired by the successes on ground. So I have a brief film which explains the context and the whole philosophy of zero budget natural farming in India, particularly in Andhra Pradesh, where it's being done, implemented by the Agriculture Department. I think the audio system is little.
ఒకప్పుడు వ్యవసాయం అనేది రైతులు చెప్పు చేతుల్లో ఉండేదన్నమాట. పక్క రైతు 15 కేజీలు వేసి అని చెప్పి మనం వచ్చేసి 20 కేజీలు వేస్తూ అక్కడ భూమిని ఎక్కువగా వేసేసి ఏమైందంటే భూమి ఇప్పుడు గడ్డ కట్టేసి దున్నేదానికి కూడా కష్టమయ్యే పరిస్థితులు ఏర్పడింది అనమాట. రసాయనాలు ఎక్కువైతే వాడి యూరియా తేవాలా, ఒక నైట్రేట్ మూడు తేవాలన్నా అంతా తీసుకొచ్చి వాళ్ళు తక్కువేం రేటు వాళ్ళు ఇస్తూ ఉండలేదు. మనకు ఖర్చు ఎక్కువైతే ఉండే, పంట దిగుబడి కూడా ఏం వస్తూ ఉండలేదు అప్పుడు.
Farmers in Andhra Pradesh and all over the country are in deep distress. Soils have eroded, the productivity has plateaued.
అప్పుడంతా దానికి ఆ రసాయనాలు వాడిన దాని వల్ల భూమిలో ఉండే సూక్ష్మ క్రిములు, సూక్ష్మ జీవులు కూడా చనిపోయినాయి. సూక్ష్మ జీవులు ఎప్పుడైతే తగ్గింది, భూమిలో ఏం సారవంతం అనేది ఏమీ ఉండలేదు.
The costs of cultivation are increasing year after year. The riskiness in agriculture has increased. To overcome all these hurdles, Government of Andhra Pradesh has seen natural farming as the best solution for a range of problems.
ఇప్పుడు ప్రకృతి వ్యవసాయం చేసే దాని వల్ల పంట దిగుబడి బాగా వస్తూ ఉండదు, రోగాలు గీగాలు ఏమీ లేకోకుండా భూమి కూడా బాగా సంతృష్టిగా, ఆమె కూడా సంతోషపడి నాకు మంచి ఆహారాన్ని అందిస్తా ఉన్నాడు రైతు. ఇలాంటి ఆహారాన్ని నాకు ఎప్పుడైతే అందిస్తారో నేను కూడా వాళ్ళకి మంచి దిగుబడిని ఇవ్వాలని చెప్పి ఆమె సంతోషపడి మనకి అట్లా చేస్తా ఉండదు.
The basic principles of natural farming are very simple. If soil biology is restored, the plant is enabled to get the nutrients which are locked up in the soil. Therefore, increasing the microbial count in the soil is a very critical requirement, and in Andhra Pradesh we are using cow dung and cow urine based formulations for increasing soil microbial count. We are also improving germination through microbial coating of seeds in cow urine and cow dung formulations.
ప్రకృతి వ్యవసాయం చేసే దాని వల్ల పశువుల ఎరువు, ఘనజీవామృతము, జీవామృతము ఇవన్నీ వాడేదాని నుంచి వల్ల భూమి కూడా మెత్తబడింది. దాంట్లో వానపాములు తయారవుతా ఉన్నాయి, సూక్ష్మజీవులు ఇప్పుడు కొన్ని ఉత్పత్తి అవుతా ఉన్నాయి భూమిలో నుంచి. ఆ సూక్ష్మజీవులు ఎప్పుడైతే ఉత్పత్తి అవుతాయో మనకి భూమి కూడా బాగా మంచి సారవంతంగా ఏర్పడుతుంది.
Multiple crops are the best way of soil fertility enhancement year long. So the basic principle is, how do we keep the ground covered with living plants?
ఈ అంతర పంటలు వేసేదాని నుంచి వల్ల మట్టి కొట్టుకోకుండా అక్కడే నిలబడి ఎక్కడైతే తీగ ఎక్కువైతే ఉంటుందో బలంగా వచ్చిండే నీళ్ళు కూడా తొందరగా కిందికి వెళ్ళిపోకుండా అక్కడే నిలబడి ఆ మొక్కలకు కూడా తేమ శాతం ఎక్కువ ఉంటుంది. ఒక 15 రోజులు వర్షం లేకపోయినా కూడా తేమ అట్లే తట్టుకోగలుగుతాయి మొక్కలకి. ప్రధాన పంటకి పంట వ్యర్థాలు ఈ మల్చింగ్ చేయడం దాని వల్ల భూమిలో పై నుంచి వచ్చిండే వర్షం నీరు అక్కడే నిదానంకి భూమిలోకి ఇంకి అక్కడ ఆ ఎరువు కూడా అట్లే తయారవుతుంది.
And pest management is done not through chemicals but through different botanical extracts. Pest management is also done through good agronomical principles. The Agriculture Department of Andhra Pradesh has put in place a very effective implementation system. The community resource persons themselves are small and marginal farmers whose lives have changed because of practice of natural farming.
రైతుకు రైతే మార్గదర్శిగా ఉంటాడు. నేను ఒక రైతునే కాబట్టి నా అనుభవాలన్నీ వాళ్ళకు పంచుతాను కాబట్టి వాళ్ళు కూడా నా ఫీల్డ్కి వచ్చి చూసి బాగా నేర్చుకుంటున్నారు.
Best practicing farmers, the community resource persons, their effectiveness has multiplied by providing them with video dissemination tools. In 2016-17, when we took up natural farming on a very large scale, one of the districts is Ananthapuram district, which had a very severe drought. The single largest crop in that district is groundnut.
అప్పుడు కూడా ఆ వర్షం రాకపోయినా కూడా తట్టుకొని మళ్ళీ వర్షం కొద్దిగా వచ్చినప్పుడు మనకు అట్లా చెట్టు బాగా ఇంప్రూవ్ అయ్యి వచ్చింది. ఎందుకంటే భూమిలో మనం అక్కడక్కడ నీటిని ఎప్పుడైతే నిల్వ చేసినామో తల్లిసాల్లోనూ అంతర పంటలు చేసిన దాని వల్ల కూడా తేమ శాతం నుంచి మనకు నిలబడి చెట్లకి అభివృద్ధి అందించింది.
And when we did a comparative study of the yields of zero budget natural farming fields versus conventional fields, to our surprise, we found that the yields in zero budget natural farming fields were double the yields. the first phase, which started in 2016 and which will be completed in 2022, we will be covering 500,000 farmers spread over 2,000 villages. Our objective is to make these villages into bio-villages. In the next phase, the idea is to take this to 6 million farmers over 8 million hectares, and that will cover 90% of the area of the state of Andhra Pradesh.
మట్టిలోనే పుట్టాను, ఈ మట్టిలోనే బతికాను, మట్టినే నమ్ముకునేవాడు ఎప్పుడు చెడిపోడు. ఈ మట్టి ఆమె భూమి, ఆ భూమికి మనకి చాలా సగ్గా సంబంధం ఉంది. వదులుకోము, నష్టమైనా వదులుకోము, ఆమెను ఆదికి వచ్చినా వదులుకోము. మట్టే మెదుకు, మట్టే బ్రతుకు.
Thank you. This experience of Andhra Pradesh has been replicated in many states. Yeah, I'll conclude what the farmer said, that the soil is my mother and protecting the soil is my duty. I get my life through my mother. So that is the message from the farmers of Andhra Pradesh and India. And so we are not looking at what is a safe poison to put into the soil. We are saying no poison. So I just want to leave two pictures. One is a bird's nest in a chili field, and typically, normally, there's a pepper crop is sprayed with so many pesticides. But in a natural farming scenario, birds find it safe to, place their eggs here. And this is even more interesting. This is a cotton field, and where you have a beehive. So the bees have come back, the butterflies have come back, the earthworms have come back. So I think we have damaged the soil enough. We have to restore it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay, for this inspiring video and talk. I'd now like to hand over to Thomas Hammond, who is working with the Land and Water Division of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, talking about something slightly different. Tom.
Thank you very much, Mette. And let me just pull up the presentation. This is slightly different. It's not directly related to pollution, but we thought, given the event today on World Soil Day, we wanted to just make a call out to a map that we're launching today, which is the global map of soil organic carbon. As Mette said in the introduction, that soils represent the single largest terrestrial pool of carbon. And this is an important, obviously an incredibly important resource, not only for agricultural production, but frankly speaking, soils and biodiversity ecosystems together represent the only functioning, viable form of carbon capture and storage that we have globally that works, and we get that service for free. So we've had several iterations previously of global analyses, global databases of soil organic carbon. This is by far and away the most detailed version of that we've been able to produce. It's based on 1 million data points that were collected over the last 2 years, soil samples. And as we all know, I think, or most of us know, we can't collect this information from space. This isn't above ground biomass or forests. We have to actually go out into the field and dig soil pits, take the soil back to the lab and analyze the soil. So it's a heck of a lot of work. But it's an important aspect of the global carbon cycle that we need to get a more consistent handle on. So the global soil carbon map, and there are copies back there, hopefully on the table, a few of them left, and I have a couple up here just in case. It's being launched today. It's on the website. As I mentioned, it's an important component of our carbon mitigation and adaptation strategy. Obviously, it's incredibly important for food security, understanding the carbon content of the soil. And it's also an important contribution to monitoring under the SDGs. The global map, the process for this iteration of the global map started almost 2 years ago. As I mentioned, this was a technical exercise that took place around the world in more than 100 countries where data was being collected, representing 90% of the terrestrial surface of the planet. Not every country was able to participate, and in those countries we were using pre-existing data. But as I say, in the countries that did participate, almost 100 countries overall, we were able to collect over 1 million new data points over the last 2 years. And as I just mentioned, that's just a quick overview of the process over the last 2 years in getting the country data and filling in the gaps that we had with already existing secondary sources. This isn't a perfect resource, but it is the most complete analysis that we have of soil carbon at the moment, and this is a baseline that we have going forward. This will be built upon, and the data will be developed and improved over time. One of the most, I think, important aspects of this is that the data is available online. It's disaggregated by land cover, by soil type, by climatic type. It is currently at a resolution of about 1 kilometer square, and that resolution will improve over time. Just an interesting a bit of analysis that this figure here is 680 petrograms of carbon. This is carbon that was measured from the surface to 30 centimeters below the surface. Up until yesterday, I had no idea what a petrogram was, but a petrogram is 1 billion tons of carbon. So the analysis is roughly 680 billion tons of carbon contained in the soils globally. And 10 countries represent more than 60% of that carbon stock, and many of those countries are in temperate zones. Russia, Canada, the United States, for instance, have much of the global content of soil organic carbon. And of course, those are in soils which are in often very cold and in some cases very arid areas. What's different? As I said, over 1 million data points collected. Many experts around the world have been trained on this, and many more will be trained. It's a bottom-up approach. So countries have been collecting the data now for the first time. We have a process in place at country level, at the grassroots level, to collect and analyze and upload these data around the world, and that process will be improving over time. And finally, just to leave off, as I mentioned, this data will be available online. It is available online right now as a beta version. There will be web services available to download the data. The Global Soil Information System, GLOSSIS, is currently under development in order to be able to access these data. We'll be developing new versions of the data sets over time, and the monitoring, as I said, will continue and be an ongoing process. As I said, there are copies. Maybe there aren't any copies over there left on the table, but I have a couple up here left over. And please consult the data online. It is available on the FAO website. Thank you, Mette.
Thank you, Tom. I think that would be an incredibly useful source of information. So I really encourage you to have a look at that and see if you can get hold of a copy and otherwise look at it online. Now, we've heard about soil, we've heard about pollutants, we've heard about microorganisms, we've heard about carbon. I think now it's time to look at the links between soil and water. So we have Mariette Verhoef-Cohen, who's the co-chair of the Global Framework on Water Scarcity in Agriculture. We'll talk a little bit about soil and water.
Who's here? Okay, thank you very much, Mette, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm the co-chair of the Water Scarcity and Agricultural Framework, we call ourselves. So water scarcity, see if this is going to work, yes. I'll put that here. Water scarcity is recognized as one of the major challenges to sustainable development efforts for countries, for farmers, and for the business sectors. The FAO and its partners created WASAC after the climate change conference COP22 in Marrakesh. This global framework on water scarcity in agriculture has been designed to bring together key players across the globe and across sectors to tackle the collective challenge of using water better in agriculture and across sectors to ensure food security for all, especially now we know that the world population is estimated to grow to 9.7 billion people in 2050. Now I'm forgetting all these nice pictures, but the global framework started 3 working groups with a focus on 1, water and migration, the second one is drought preparedness, and the third one was the financial mechanisms. We are aiming at finding solutions to alleviate the fate of vulnerable livelihoods and enhancing their resilience through sustainable, affordable, and innovative interventions. Our overall objective is to bring together partners, key stakeholders, and country representatives to present success stories in dealing with water scarcity in agriculture, to report progress made towards achieving the objectives of WASAC, and to trigger further commitment and action, of course. WASAC has partners from all fields and backgrounds. All are aligned with the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, the Paris Climate Agreement, and other programs in relation to agriculture and water, especially with the Sustainable Development Goals 1, 2, and 6, and it contributes to the SDGs 5, 12, 13, and 17. Water scarcity is the main objective of the global framework. One key dimension comprises agriculture and food system, which includes crops, livestock, fisheries, and forestry, as well as value and supply chains, and consumption and trade. The second dimension is climate change, encompassing both adaptation and a mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, which also creates pollutions. My organization, Women for Water Partnership, uses water and agriculture as an entry point to women's empowerment and to improve equitable access to water for all users. Ensuring women's empowerment and engagement at all levels will encourage them to reach their potential as agents of change. Women traditionally have vast experience in the water and agricultural sector, and the crucial role they play in effective and efficient water management is increasingly acknowledged and supported by evidence. Involving both women and men in decision-making and integrated water resources initiatives leads to better sustainability, governance, and efficiency. Women should be seen as key allies and the access to sustainable behavioral change in the water dimensions of climate adaptation. So a collaborative action of the WASEC platform towards tackling water scarcity in agriculture is an opportunity for agriculture to become part of the solution to climate change and pollution. WASEC aims to bring partners together to assist countries and stakeholders through solutions in agriculture and the food value chain, and thus creating adaptation and mitigation benefits. WASEC targets many stakeholders, including young farmers and women farmers, highlighting opportunities in, in agriculture and the agribusinesses. Women's lives are the most impacted when facing the adverse effects of pollution and climate change, but they are also crucial agents of change. By coordinating work plans among partners, actively engage and contribute, prioritize the most vulnerable, ensuring due consideration of water governance and politics, using the combined expertise and resources of its partners, this will create a world whose food systems are secure and resilient to increasing water scarcity in a changing climate change. I will finish with the words of Eduardo Mansour, who is the Director of Land and Water Divisions at the FAO, and he stated, "We must produce more food and with less water and less pesticides. The WASEC Global Framework will bring together key players from across the globe to design and implement integrated strategies to do just that and prevent water scarcity from setting back our ambitious vision of a future of peace and plenty for all." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mariette. And now we would like to open the floor to any questions, any comments that you have. I think, as you've heard here, we have a panel of experts on a number of different topics here related to soil. We'd like to hear if you have any questions to pose to them, and any comments or any stories you want to tell us about soil, how important they are, how we can better manage them, and how we can celebrate soils today. So, yes, in the front row. I'm not sure we have a roving mic. We do? If not, we will just have to speak up very loud. So
I can try to speak loudly. My name is Mark Sutton. I chair the International Nitrogen Initiative. We're involved in something called the International Nitrogen Management System with UNEA and the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management. I'd like to see if we could link perhaps the comments of Mr. Pennock and Dr. Kumar on... I need to talk a bit quieter now. Firstly, on the plant protection products, I guess my key question is different chemicals will having different impacts. You mentioned glyphosate, but are there some protection products that you would say, no, we really should not be using, that are clear? And I'd like then to link over with the story about neem in India. Maybe you can comment on neem, because it's natural, but of course it's having a plant protection function as well as its coating of urea in India to reduce denitrification and hence nitrogen losses. So I'd like to get a comment from that. And coming to Dr. Kumar, I'd like to ask, I want to first congratulate you on the use of manure and of urine, of course, because there's so much nitrogen in urine. I can imagine your system is performing well both because of increased soil organic matter from the manure, but also a rich blend of lots of nutrients coming out of those. But I can imagine in India there still is a need in some certain senses for fertilizer to produce some things, and there's different horses for courses. So do you think you could have an India entirely without fertilizer, or not?
All right, we will take a couple of more questions before we go back to the panel here. So I can see a couple in the back. There's one in the back row and one in the very back. So let's take those two at least.
My name is Norbert Sangura. I work for the Commonwealth Human Ecology Council. I'm the country representative. We are having a project on improving the quantity and the quality of bees in the world as the agents of pollination. But unfortunately, the biggest threat we have is the pesticides that are being sprayed on our crops. Probably the FAO experts could come in and advise. Second concern is farming, particularly we talk about the urban urban agriculture, and we miss the concept of roof water harvest. It could do a lot of work, it could do a lot of support if actually all roofs in towns could harvest water instead of going to block the sewages and carry rubbish into our oceans. It could be used. If there's some research could be put in place so that it is used to improve urban agriculture. And lastly, we are losing a lot of water towers and wetland areas that could be best resources for water in form of agriculture production. Please, I seek your advice. Thank you.
Thank you, and there was one behind you, very back.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeffrey. I'm from Wuhan Botanical Garden, Chinese Academy of Science. And my question is, one thing that is always overlooked is the effect of invasive species on diversity. And one of the problems is most of the invasive species produce allelochemicals that usually kill either the soil nematodes or usually kill the species that are grown on those particular soil. That is one very huge major soil pollution, I believe, in my experience. And also another one is there a relationship between pollution and the increase in the number of invasive species that are growing around the world that are becoming naturalized? Because most of the native species, you find when the pollution levels are too high, they do not do well. And the invasive species that are more adaptable to these conditions, you find grow more and more. An example is Parthenium, that is now a major issue in most of the Asian countries and Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take this first round of questions, and then let's take another round. Maybe we start from one side and then go along the panel.
Well, thank you very much. In terms of specific pesticides, from the first question, I mean, the one thing to recognize is that the most toxic suite of pesticides is already under the purview of my colleague from the conventions. So, you know, the regulatory framework which has developed since World War II has dealt with the pesticides of greatest concern, certainly. However, there are still pesticides, and we recognize them in the report, such as copper-based fungicides, which have a very toxic effect to earthworms and for microorganisms generally, and for a host of other soil functions. And the neonicotinoids, which are of concern in many areas, but certainly in terms of earthworms, have been shown to be particularly toxic. So, I mean, overall, I think we found that it was difficult to see a clear message in a lot of the pesticide studies, plant protection products, but there were a few cases where the results were unambiguous, no question. In terms of the sort of, it was wonderful to have the two presentations, the one from India, along with this, because it shows how knowledgeable farmers working on, in that case, a fairly small land base, can do very progressive things. and can eliminate many of the compounds that might cause us concern. But of course, it's a large world, and there are other farming systems where it's much more difficult to have that sort of intensive land-based knowledge and intensive production practices that allow that. So it's a very inspirational story, and it's a wonderful story for World Soil Day, but it's a big world out there, and there are systems. The province I'm from in Canada has been transformed through the adoption of no-till. And wind erosion was a terrible scourge there, and it's been now over 30 years since we had a major wind erosion event because of the adoption of no-till. So that's a success story in another way, but using a different suite of farming methods associated with it. The invasive species question is a very interesting one, and it's one I'm not very knowledgeable about, to be honest. I suspect the gentleman back there is much more. There's certainly no doubt that in landscapes that have undergone soil degradation through any cause are certainly vulnerable to the loss of native species and invasive species. So, I mean, my understanding is that the invasive species and soil and land degradation also often go hand in hand. And the adoption of sustainable soil management and reducing soil degradation is one of the measures that can be effective in reducing the invasive species.
Well, I'm not an expert on these issues, but what we try to do anyway is to educate the farmers and so there are universities involved. We at the moment we have a project of 74 female farmers who will be educated, who will learn how to use the soil, who will get an analysis of their soil, who will be taught by university professors on what's the best for the soil in seeds, in fertilizers, in pesticides if it's really needed. Of course, the water issue is big, how you can use less water. So that is really the things that we're aiming at, and we're not specialized. We leave that over to the university.
Thank you. Vijay?
In Andhra Pradesh itself, we will be reaching 10% of the state's cultivable area by 2020. And by 2024, that's our ambition, to reach out to 8 million hectares. And Andhra Pradesh is a microcosm of India. It has all the agroecological zones which are present in most of the country, except Himalaya, the temperate areas. My sense is that the understanding of nature, farming in harmony with nature, these are generic principles, and the mechanisms that we are using in India, the cow dung and cow urine based formulation, is specific to India. And we really don't see any need for any chemical fertilizers. Zero was also invented in India. So we believe very strongly zero chemicals, zero fertilizers, zero pesticides, and also virtually zero cost to the farmers. It is possible because once we restore soil biology, which has been mentioned by experts here, we think there are something, we have not understood what is below the soil. So it's very important to have agriculture which is in harmony with nature. And our belief is even the neem-based pesticides are not required once the soils are healthy. We now have farmers who don't use any of the pesticides, not even the botanicals. Through efficient crop management, cover crops, trap crops, border crops, so good agronomical principles and respect for soil. In fact, these plants are so healthy that they repel the pests themselves. So the farmers, after 4 or 5 years of this practice, don't even need the neem tree. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Shall we take anything to add? Should we take another round? We'll take another round of questions. In the front. This, microphone's coming.
Yes, my name is Barak Okoba. I work for FAO in Kenya, and indeed the subject we are discussing today is of great importance, especially for us who are working with farmers, trying to green the landscape. And we have been pushing the idea of climate smart agriculture principles, adoptions, and specifically conservation agriculture. And we have all these experiences and challenges that we are facing, especially when it comes to use of glyphosate. I mean, we do not overemphasize on use of chemicals, but initially, no doubt, farmers are encouraged to push in the glyphosate. Once we have a good soil cover, then definitely the use of glyphosate reduces. Of course, amongst all the promoters of conservation agriculture, there are NGOs that have either perceptions which are scientifically proven on the use of glyphosate and the effects on food and all these aspects. I just wanted to find out from Dan on whether it was also within your scope to look at the effect of glyphosate and other pesticide products on water bodies, both open and underground. I don't know whether it was within your scope to look at that. My other concern is to Thomas. Where is he?
In the back.
Yes, I don't know, as he introduced a petrogram as a unit. Yeah, as you look at the issues of organic carbon, I don't know whether you have set up some reference centers for long-term data collection, especially for looking at the MRVs, and possibly where would some of these long-term reference centers in Kenya and other countries, if you could clarify on that. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple more here in front, yes?
Yeah, thank you again, Thomas. Before you go back, I just wanted to find out, a few weeks ago I was in Bonn, and there was this issue of peatlands, that peatlands were not well understood, how much carbon is under, and especially the Congo and then Indonesia and so on. I just want to find out whether the 680 PG, I don't know what that means, includes carbon in peatlands.
It does, but it's a very coarse scale at this point.
Okay, we had one more just on the second row over here.
Thank you so much. My name is Patso Kamanga from Malawi. Mine is not a question, but rather a comment. I thought it was worth mentioning to this gathering that today, as we celebrate World Soil Day, I should inform that the Africa Group has introduced a resolution on soil, which is being negotiated, and we hope it will be passed by this UNEA. Basically, in this resolution, we are calling upon member states and UN organizations to address soil pollution within the global environmental, food security and development and health agendas in an integrated manner. And it was pleasing to note that in all these presentations, elements that you are bringing out are what we have in this resolution. The importance of soil as a carbon stock, the example that has been presented to us from India, which we think should be duplicated, they are all in that resolution. So as member states, as government, we have done our part, and it is now up to us, the rest of us, to work together so that it should benefit the ordinary people out there. Thank you so much.
Indeed, thank you very much for the African region for presenting that resolution. I hear it has gone through with a clean text, so it will be adopted later this week, we hope. But let's just have some answers to the questions that were asked here. Don't know who wants to start. Thomas already gave one reply, but you want to say a few more things? Or Dan?
Sure, well, thank you. In terms of the question asked about glyphosate and its role in the report, it's certainly covered in the report. It's covered very explicitly because it's probably one of the greatest areas of concern, quite frankly. So we examine it in the context of soil organisms and soil functions, but it is examined in the context of soil biodiversity, in water regulation, and in soil erosion control. So I summarized it briefly in the report. I won't go over that ground again, but it certainly is extensively examined. In fact, it's probably the plant protection product most examined in the report because of its importance at this time. And certainly in terms of conservation agriculture, the use of herbicides for weed control is very central to that, and it's one of the real challenges of conservation agriculture, I think, is to how to address the real concerns that people have around glyphosate use. Scientific evidence is part of that, but as we know, it's only part of it. But it's certainly, scientists has to do our job of providing the evidence which can be used by others in their programs. In terms of I was also involved with the carbon project, and Thomas asked me to look at that. So yes, the carbon map draws upon the national soil surveys, and it makes it unique. There are other carbon maps which are done by research groups, and they're very good maps, but they're using the data available to them, whereas the FAO ITPS map uses data provided by national soil surveys. So it's a much richer data set than ever before. But most importantly, almost a third of the national soil surveys are receiving training in how to gather new evidence and how to take evidence from existing reports, such as the one you talked about, and use those. So it's a unique product because really of the United Nations system. The member states are providing data to allow this map to go forward. And it's a unique process, and perhaps it's the process more than the current product that we should be celebrating, I think, on World Soil Day. A quick mark about the peatlands. It only deals with the first 30 centimeters of peat, so it's incomplete because the complete extent of peat is not represented in the report. There are other estimates based on that, but it's an early product, and it needs to improve overall on the treatment of peat in the report. So.
All right. Now, I would like to hand over to my counterpart in Food and Agriculture Organization, Alexander Jones, who is Director of the Climate and Environment Division within FAO. Alex?
Okay, thank you. I've been given the thankless task of wrapping up all these interventions, which have been fascinating, in about 4 minutes, which is rather difficult to do. We always get to the end and there's a lot of questions. Obviously, the first thing I want to do is to thank Mette in particular and UN Environment in general for helping us to organize this and for co-hosting it. I want to touch very quickly on a couple of the key points here that we've gone over and just single out a few things from the many presentations we've had. Mette was highlighting our concerns over biodiversity and the fact that over 1/3 of the soils in the world are degraded. And this is something that we have to deal with, not only because it's our duty as stewards, but also because, as we know from the recent communications, the number of hungry people in the world has increased. Last year, we've gone to 815 million people. We're going in the wrong direction after many years of going in the right direction. So we need to produce around 50% more food in the next 50 years to cope with a growing population and changing diets. This is a requirement. So on one hand of the equation, we have this need, more and better food and less waste. On the other, we have a degraded resource base. Just one stat that I'm not sure many of you are aware is that soil accretion is normally considered in the range of 1 to 3 centimeters per century. So when we talk about erosion and soil destruction, this is the time it takes depending on humidity, 1 to 3 centimeters per century. So it's a long-term job. Also, I was very happy with the mention of the possibilities, the huge possibilities of composting and other soil nutrients from our huge food loss and waste pool. As you know, about 1/3 of all food is either wasted at production or along the value chain or at consumption points. Carlos discussed some really interesting points on the roles of persistent organic pollutants, and of course FAO has been very heavily engaged in this with both Basel and Rotterdam conventions. We work throughout the world. At the same time, we do have to recognize that there is still a large demand, especially in emergencies and crises, for substances that are hazardous to use. And I would mention the recent desert locust outbreak in parts of Africa, the fall armyworm outbreak, and so forth. So on one hand, we would really like to minimize wherever possible the use. In other situations, it is necessary to intervene, and this has to be dealt with in a responsible manner. Dan Pennock's comments, I really like the comment about how we really know little about soil biodiversity despite an immense amount of studies. It's a bit of an unexplored word despite the amount of work being done on it and the high quality of science that is applied to it. So this is an area where we need to do a lot. And it's also about a change in mindset. And I always remember when I was studying in agronomy, my professors telling us to think about soil and not about dirt. And I'm sure you've heard this many times. Dirt is something ugly that we walk on. It is something dirty. That's where we get the verb. Soil is what grows all of our food. And so it's a very important distinction between those two. I really like the presentation by BVJ. I've seen projects like this myself in India. These are amazing, and I won't amplify too much on his excellent presentation. I just want to add one consideration that I'm looking at as well. One very important thing in the system is that farm budgets are becoming much more profitable because they're replacing capital inputs in terms of fertilizers, in terms of pesticides, with labor inputs, which is excellent in this context. There is a surplus of labor. People need work. People need income. So this is a very good trade-off, and it works in this context. And also, there's a lot of complementary ecosystem services produced by this, which are outside of the production chain, but as he was highlighting, they improve the general environment, therefore the overall well-being of the population in the area, even those not engaged in the activity. So it has many, many secondary benefits. Last thing which I really want to highlight is there's this vision sometimes that natural farming or organic farming is a sort of a back to origins. Organic farming is much more knowledge intensive than industrial farming because you are replacing mechanization, inputs, capital, and so forth with knowledge. Farmers need to know a lot more about system, and it's very, very complicated. Tom's discussion, obviously, I've been involved in this. The issue of soils as the largest global pool of soil organic carbon. Now, this comes into my other side of the mandate as climate, and of course, we're just coming out of COP. We're very interested in soil carbon sequestration. The average figure that we're looking at, and this is, I say, a global average, it's considered that degraded soils have the ability to store at least 7 tons per hectare of carbon. This is available with existing technology if the resources can be found for it. Maria's presentation was very interesting. I'm familiar with some of the work of WASAG. What I was really interested in was the innovative interventions, and for the water and agriculture as an entry point for women's empowerment. This is really important because we know that depending 60 to 70% of labor in agriculture is provided by women globally, and the role of women as stewards of the better use of water is a really, really critical feature. FAO, as you know, needs to listen to all of our members, and there are different interpretations on the use of agrochemicals and fertilizers. No one solution will fit every context. As a very practical matter, we do advocate for reduced use of pesticides, simply because they're expensive, first of all. They will affect farm budgets. And secondly, because any pest will eventually acquire immunity to pesticides. Our approach of integrated pest management is designed to prolong as long as possible that cycle where we will have to replace them. Any introduction of new chemicals is higher risk because people are not used to them. And one thing that we are seeing, unfortunately, is pest migration these days. With changing climates, with changing agroecological zones, we are seeing, for example, in the north, pests moving northwards. Warmer winters means you have less die-off of pests, which means farmers are starting to use pesticides with which they're not familiar, which is a very high risk. It's an increasing, and it's not a stable situation. So there's unfortunately not a lot we can do about that change immediately, but we need better awareness. I know we're running out of time, so I will just make a last mention. Others have as well. I just want to remind you that FAO, ITPS, and UN Environment will be hosting the Global Symposium for Soil Pollution on May 2 to 4, and this is a very important event. Thank you.
A warm thank to all our panels, members, a warm thank to the audience. The plenary, the opening of plenary is at 10 o'clock, so you better rush over there. And thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you.